Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our latest Good Employment Charter webinar. Today we're focusing on equality issues. My name is Ian MacArthur and I'm the head of the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. Today I'm really pleased to be joined with a really enthusiastic panel. I think I'm going to have my work cut out to keep them to time. I'm joined by Sharon Amesu. Sharon is the chair of the Manchester branch of the Institute of Directors. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Ian.
We're also really pleased to have John Hacking. Hi, John.
Hi.
John's the coordinator of the Greater Manchester Living Wage Campaign. And finally, but by no means least, we're joined by Donald Moore. Hi, Donald.
Hi.
Donald is the chair of Rowlinson's Knitwear, one of our founder members. So before we get into the discussion, I'd just like to run through some housekeeping. The webinar works best on a Chrome browser. So if you are having problems with your browser, maybe change to Chrome and it should work. If you've got any problems while you're viewing it, just refresh the page and it should work. On the right-hand side, you'll see chat and question tabs. If you have any questions for the panel, please drop them in there and they'll come through to me. Also, we encourage you to use the chat function. This sort of event is in place of what we used to do in terms of a kind of networking event. And it's really important that we keep that networking going. So if you want to chat with some colleagues that you haven't seen for a while, that you would have probably had a coffee with at one of our events, drop a little note in there and start a chat. I hope you can engage in that. As always, our webinars will be recorded and we will be uploading them afterwards to our YouTube channel, so you or your colleagues can look at it later. Also, we always write up our webinars, and we'll have a post on our blog / news pages on the website probably sometime next week in terms of a report from the event. So today we're focusing on equality issues. And I have to say at the outset, although the Good Employment Charter doesn't actually have a characteristic around equality issues, it lies at the heart of the Charter. It's woven all the way through. The Good Employment Charter aims to ensure that good employment is enjoyed by all. But of course, that's easier said than done. And what we've seen over the last 3 months with the COVID pandemic is a sharpening, a focus on inequality issues that impact on our society, and particularly through our workplaces, especially as we start to open up our workplaces again. And whilst COVID may be an indiscriminate viral global pandemic, it's pretty clear that its impact isn't. I saw a quote recently that we're all in the same storm, but we're definitely in different boats. And I think that just kind of underpins and underlines the sort of issues that we want to talk about today. I think in almost every direction, especially as we do begin to open up the economy, familiar but new inequalities present themselves. Last week and again this week, the Public Health England have reported on a disparities report, and a really interesting choice of words to use, disparities as opposed to inequalities. Let's call a spade a spade. It is inequality. It's not just differences. There's something unfair that lies behind some of this. So it's inequalities. And particularly highlights the comorbidities in the Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. But it also reflects the key social and inequalities that frankly we've been living with for decades. And it just reflects that. This is a key issue going forward for the Charter. This will be the first of a series of webinars that will look at inequality issues. Today we're going to look at a broad spectrum, but moving forward we will dig into individual inequality issues. But as always, we want to focus on kind of practical steps as well. It's not just to depress you on a wet Thursday afternoon and to tell you just how bad things are. We want to give you some hope and some pointers as to how you as good employers can start addressing some of these issues. And I want to turn to you, John, first of all, to talk about living wage, really. We were all on our doorsteps Thursday evenings at 8 o'clock, roundly applauding our key workers. But I have to say, I found the whole thing a little bit ringing hollow when you understood that our care workers and our foundational economy workers that were keeping society going at that time were nearly always in insecure work and low-paid work. So can you give us an insight as to what the campaign does, John, and perhaps how the real living wage can make a difference in this space?
Sure. Thanks, Ian. I will talk about the living wage, and obviously I'll talk about the campaign. I think it's fair to say I'm no economist, but it's pretty obvious that we came in as a city region into this pandemic as one of the fastest growing and most vibrant economies in the UK and possibly in Europe. It's almost certain that we're going to come out of it in recession. And that recession, I think, is going to have a impact on those levels of deprivation and inequality that already existed before. What I think will be interesting, and it's worth perhaps exploring how we track this and monitor it, what kind of inequalities, particularly in the workforce, are exacerbated by the pandemic. In other words, we know that there were inequalities coming into this, and they are hardly likely to have been resolved by it. But which ones have been made worse, and which, in a sense, are new on our radar? I think the health inequalities has always been an issue, but I think health inequalities related to the workforce, the anxiety around returning to work, the pressures that it's put on people working at home, the changes to their working patterns at home has caused a lot of stress and anxiety. And I think they're not new. They're well known to people who operate in that particular field, but I think they're slightly more visible to the wider public than they were. And I think we need to tackle those. Just in terms of the impact overall, I think there's two key factors, really. One is it's not going to be a universal impact. You're right, we are in the same storm, but in different boats. It's going to have a much more detrimental impact on young people. Under 25s are going to be find a greater impact on this, both in terms of those who are already in work, whether they're in the gig economy or low-paid economy, or those who are looking to get into work and the opportunities. You can pick any figure you like out of the range of figures that economists are throwing at us, but there could be an additional 500,000 under 25s unemployed by Christmas, which is a huge impact on the economy and will have a detrimental impact going forward, obviously. I suppose the other thing is that just the impact on business, and I'm not a businessman and I don't profess to talk about it, but if I do try and keep up with the views of our business community, because at the end of the day, they're the employers that we're trying to influence. And there was a survey earlier this week from Business Live online, which was a survey of 280 businesses across Greater Manchester. That 48% of them, the impact of COVID on their business was going to be catastrophic. Now, however benevolent your view of the word catastrophic, that's not a good thing. And from my point of view as the campaign, which I'll talk about slightly in a second, from our point of view, part of that survey, the immediate response of a lot of businesses to that catastrophe is to drive down wages. They're going to have to make cost cuttings. 10% said that they would probably be cutting staff wages. Somewhere similar said that they would expect a pay freeze for at least 12 months. And others said that there'd be a combination of restricting bonus payments, restricting overtime and all the rest of it. So there's going to be a lot of pressure. I think from the Living Wage Campaign's point of view, the Living Wage Campaign is a campaign. We're part of the Greater Manchester Poverty Action Group. We have been going quite a long time. Our purpose is to promote and educate people and encourage people, employers in particular, obviously, to pay the living wage. In terms of anybody who's got any technical questions, as Ian will know, about the process of accreditation for becoming a living wage employer, that's with the Living Wage Foundation, and they are the national body who accredit. So I can direct anybody to them, or I can take their questions. So just a point, if there are any questions that come up on the sort of the process, I'm happy to follow up afterwards and get back to people. So I just want to say very quickly in a minute or so, there are challenges. There were already issues with low pay in Greater Manchester prior to the epidemic, the pandemic. You know, 23% of all workers in Greater Manchester were paid below the living wage, which is £9.30 an hour. But the number of people from particular ethnic groups and women were disproportionately affected by low pay. There doesn't appear to be any evidence that that will change. And so the inequality that came into this is the inequality that we're emerging with. What we don't know is how different that's going to be in terms of scale. What we do know is that there are opportunities. There's clearly, as Ian referred to, a sense that people working in the care sector, whether it's NHS or care workers and key workers more widely, are due some credit, and we hope that that credit turns into better pay. My daughter's a nurse on a COVID ward. She has fairly mixed views about the clap for carers. I think she finds it, you know, nice and warm, but at the end of the day, doesn't pay their bills. So I think that turning that sense of community and sense of goodwill into reality is something that we want to do. The Living Wage Foundation estimates that there's 1 million key workers in this country who are paid below the living wage, and they've started a national campaign which we're supporting to make that change. And of course, the Mayor Burnham has already suggested to government that all care workers should, as a minimum, be paid the living wage. So there are opportunities coming out of it, but we expect the picture on inequality and levels of low pay, particularly amongst particular sectors of society, and also affecting particular parts of the economy, the foundational economy, Manchester in particular, in terms of bars, hospitality, all of those sectors that we already know were suffering. What I would say finally is that whilst I'm sure that a lot of employers will have a lot of priorities coming up in the next month or so, you know, 3 or 6 months, that are worrying them, the business case for paying the living wage is still compelling. It is still a good thing to be a good employer and pay your staff a wage that allows them to live a decent life. I mean, I had a conversation the other day with somebody who couldn't afford the bus fare to get to work, to a job that didn't pay them enough to pay the bus fare to get them to work. Now, that is not good for productivity. It's not good for retention. It's not good for the workers' mental health. Sickness levels are going to be high. So the business case is still compelling, even though I accept that in the middle of a storm, getting that message across might be slightly more difficult than previously.
About the productivity part, not just on a firm level, not just on a company's impact of productivity, but as an economy, it's pretty obvious. The bigger the divide between those that have and those that have impact on the journey, the progress as a society we will make. So it's absolutely essential that we move forward on that. Sharon, I was coming to you, but it seems that we've just lost your picture. But can you still hear us, Sharon?
Oh, have you?
Yeah,
I can hear you very clearly. Can you not see me at all?
I can see you.
Okay, maybe it's me.
I can see.
That's fine. As long as everyone else can.
I can see everyone.
As long as everyone else can see you, Sharon, that's great. It's only me and my bandwidth. I think I've got a problem with. I have to get the kids off the internet.
Okay.
Sharon, I wanted to turn to you with your IOD hat on, really, and look at your members' experience on how some of your members have addressed some of the more ingrained and perhaps institutional inequalities that we're having to live with. And perhaps also, maybe you could challenge the Charter back and tell us how you think we as a movement, and we like to think ourselves as a movement for good employment, how we could be challenged to address some of the more deep-seated inequalities.
Yeah. So I think that, well, first of all, thanks very much for the invitation, Ian, to join this conversation. It's so important right now for us to have it. And I think bringing candor to it, the primary focus of our membership would not historically have been the extent to which we have a raised consciousness about how we serve the communities that we sit in. It would be very much a focus on ensuring that we meet and satisfy the requirements of our shareholders. But what we've been wanting to do is really elevate in the minds of our members how important it is for us to be conscious of the communities that we sit in and serve, and almost think about, rather than having this narrowing of the lens to simply profit, widening that and saying the widening of the aperture and seeing how when we elevate society through business, it's better for everyone. That makes all the difference. And so we've had a real focus, certainly during the time of my tenure working alongside my regional director, Claire Ebury, about how we can bring our membership onto the same page around that agenda. There are, of course, real concerns that our members have in the wake of COVID, and some interesting research has just been referenced. But we all also want to bring attention and hold our members' attention to this idea of building back better, and really harnessing that slogan and making it not simply rhetoric, but something that we meaningfully engage with. What does build back better mean? What does that mean in the business context? It means that we build back better, and added to that is for all. So business has a responsibility to serve our communities, and there are real issues regarding the affordability as far as the living wage and so on is concerned. But there also is a responsibility for us not to have a short-term approach to this, but understand that it's the short-termism that has caused the level of equality that we continue to have in society, rather than looking at the long term and how we can invest moving forward. And of course, one of the key areas where we see disproportionality as far as inequity is concerned is within the BAME community. And as has been referenced, those inequities and those inequalities pre-existed COVID. What COVID has simply done is exposed them and unveiled them. And so I believe that business now not simply has an opportunity, but a responsibility to step into the gap and say, what can we do in addressing these inequalities? Because actually, the widening wealth gap impacts us all. Where you have inequalities in health, then you have a greater burden on the NHS. Then you have us having to pay our taxes to address those health inequalities, and so on and so on and so on. And so we've been really passionate about pushing that agenda, raising awareness, increasing our outreach into marginalized communities. And specifically in the immediate, we've been leading on conversations on race and helping our leaders, our membership to really think about, well, to what extent are we raising our own understanding of race in our society, what that looks like, and the part that we can play in redressing the imbalance. The pushback as far as the Charter is concerned, it is this. I believe that the inequalities that we see, in particular as far as the BAME community are concerned, is so stark now, Ian. It's so entrenched, it's so stark, it's so embedded, and so significant, statistically significant, that we can't simply have it lobbed into an other category that we deal with, but there needs to be a real intentionality and focus, laser focus on the issue, specifically addressing a significant proportion of the population living in the Greater Manchester area. And so what I'll be wanting to do is invite the Charter to include that explicitly. How is it that our employers are going to be specifically looking at the work that they're doing in relation to BAME communities? How are they working towards supporting them in their recruitment practices, in their engagement policies? How are they looking at targeting the work around health and well-being? We know that people from the BAME community are disproportionately affected by mental health conditions, for example. What specific targeted focus are our employers going to bring to those areas? And that's really the pushback that I'd be bringing back to the Charter, and saying, let's on these issues widen the conversation, broaden the conversation to include areas that are significantly affecting significant members of their employee population.
Sharon, thanks for that. Really good overview, but challenge accepted. I think it's one of those areas that we will be, and I like the idea of laser focus on it, moving very sharply towards in terms of how we address these issues. I've been struck particularly over the last probably month or so, as government has continually almost spewed out guidance daily, and the only language you will find it in is English or Welsh.
Correct.
Which is just, you know, if there's a quick win to address institutionalized racism, that's it. I can remember, I'm old enough to remember back in the 80s, I worked in Edinburgh City Council, and there was nothing we published that went out to the public that wasn't in at least half a dozen ethnic languages before you put anything out. And now that's been lost over the years. And it's something
Yes.
we really do need to rediscover, because if we don't communicate these messages, we don't engage and reach out in appropriate cultural communication, then what's the point?
I agree with you, Ian. Our cultural competence has diminished over time.
Absolutely.
And what we shifted toward, ironically, is this trajectory of a uniform universalism, as it were. So we're all brought into the one system without recognizing nuance and difference, and in fact seeing that as being important for stakeholder engagement, etc. So absolutely, I agree with you.
Great. We'll work on that together, Sharon, I'm sure. Donald, can I turn to you? Donald sent me a blog, I think, it was a polemic, I don't know what it was, Donald. It was a real passionate piece, but it underlined your leadership and your values. Can you just tell us how you ingrained equality issues into Rowlinson?
Yeah, I think it was just a rant, really, but good employers need good leaders. And I'm frustrated that we haven't seen enough good leadership in the country, really, from politics to all organisations, not just SMEs and PLCs, but all not-for-profits and third sector. And it strikes me that the leaders haven't really shown enough care to the people that need it most, and the people that need it most are the lower paid. And I think there's a sense that leaders are so full of their own worries, that they don't even give thought to what it's like to suffer from inequality, whether that's pay or anything else really. And I think that I hoped that we'd come out of this with Build Back Better, and that people would see it as an opportunity to be remembered really for how well they conducted themselves through the crisis. But there are just too few examples really. So that was the rant that I sent to Ian, saying, you know, there are really good people, but who are they and what are they doing? Because we need to be leaders, need followers, and as followers we need to see some great examples really. So just I don't consider myself to be a very good leader actually, but just to consider what we've been through recently briefly. We became employee owned about 5 years ago, partly because we'd had enough of shareholder primacy and greed, really, and we wanted to build something good for the future, something that really meaningful. And so we became employee owned, and by putting people and then customers first before and shareholders last, that transformed our business actually. And when you treat people really well and you show care and trust, then they give the same to customers, and then customers treat you really well as well, and you start to do really well. And I think our profits are like 7 times higher than they were when we were an average SME, where the fat cats were creaming it all off with no care for the low paid. So one of the things that we wrote in was that we would announce the difference between our highest paid and lowest paid every year, because that's really important. Constitutionally, it can never be more than 10 times, and that includes bonuses, because the fat cats will always look to pay super bonuses anyway. And so that's how we set off. Our colleague happiness is amazing, but so is customer satisfaction. When we started to worry about the pandemic, which was before the politicians did their stuff, we decided, but it was obvious, that we'd look after the lowest paid first. So we said we'd look after our low paid. By definition at the time, it was like anyone less than 25 grand. And half of our people work in the warehouse or on machines. And we said to be able to fund that and be viable, the higher paid would all take pay cuts of between 10 and 50%. And that went down really well, because there was a sense that everyone was in it together. But the people who could afford to give to protect the lower paid, they did, and they felt great about it. When they announced the furlough scheme, which was like fantastic, because about 80% of us were furloughed, that allowed us actually to keep the pay cuts, but to pay the furloughed colleagues more. So all our furloughed colleagues on less than like 30, 35 grand or something are on 90% of their usual pay. And that's because some leaders would think these people are just sat at home doing nothing, so that's what they deserve, and they're lucky to get what they get. What we think is, do you really know how hard it is for people to live on even the accredited living wage, which we pay, and we pay full pension actually? Food bills are astronomical at the moment. It's not just the food inflation, because there aren't any offers on him anymore. It's just that people are going through more food. There was a program on BBC Two last night actually showing that the food producers are up by like 30%. So that means that the bills are up by that amount. So there aren't enough examples of. So what happens, and what will happen in this recession, is people will look at wage bills, leaders will look to slash the number and play the numbers game, and they'll get rid of the lower paid first, and probably the ones that cost the least, like the ones that haven't been there long, or the young people, which is just tragic, really, I think. So we need people to think of the lower paid first. The higher paid can afford to take cuts. That's where they should be looking. Don't look in the mirror. Imagine what it's like for the low paid and the people who are suffering from inequality, and focus on them first. And if you do, there's a real business case. I mean, inequality is bad for society, and it's bad for the economy. It's bad in all ways, but there's a new way. Well, it's an old way actually, but the new way is pay differentials are really important. The higher paid and the fat cats should definitely be taking less to protect the low paid through this crisis. The crisis might be around for 2 or 3 years, but the higher paid can withstand that usually. All I hear is people talking, and these are like middle-class white people, just blagging on about work from home, and is it good or is it bad? What about half the population that haven't got that opportunity, that might not have a garden to go out with, that have to work, that might have to go to work when they're ill? You know, they're the people that we should thinking about. So effectively, Ian, that's my rant in words. I've probably missed stuff out, and I apologise actually to everyone for not having a bookcase as well. I feel a bit left out, really. So that's me, Ian.
It's not just you, Donald. There's more to you than that, and I know it. But more to the point, I've also been in your office, and I've seen the proliferation of books around your office. So don't hide your light. And you're also, you said you're not a good leader. You've just given us a fantastic example of what leadership's about. You've set an example, and you've taken the steps to implement it. So, Donald, don't hide your light. I think you've been an exemplar, and you're an inspiration for us all in the way you've addressed that. So, thank you. I want to touch on something, Donald, that perhaps you've got a view on, but Sharon and John also. I think one of the things that we're very conscious of, particularly in the reopening phase, is that a lot of people will be and have been on furlough. Some people will have been working from home. And now there's a kind of push, let's get back into the workplace, let's get back into a reopening various parts of the economy. Now, not everybody's going to be able to do that. There are people that are going to be left behind because either they're in a shielded household, or perhaps they don't feel confident enough, or perhaps they themselves have got conditions. So have we got any examples of how progressive employers are dealing with those sorts of issues? Donald, how are you dealing with it?
The way that we deal with everything, really, which is all about care and trust. So we have individual contact with our 60 people every week. We've got a phased return for work. We've done videos, we've done quizzes to make people feel better. We've asked, the key really is to be flexible, and that involves trust. So we asked everyone how they feel about coming back to work. What are their individual circumstances? Is it to do with childcare or caring? Is it to do with public transport? What surprised me actually, and seems to be different from a lot of companies that I talk to, is virtually all our people are desperate to come back to work. Even the people that can work from home want to be part of that sense of belonging, really. It can be lonely working from home, really. and people just want to get back. We ask people every week how they would feel about coming back to work, and score it out of 10, where 1 is they're really relaxed and 10 is they don't want to come back. And I think that our most concerning score was about 2, where everyone's just desperate to come back, really. But people, we trust everyone. So some people say, can I work less hours? Can I spread it over a longer working week? Can I do 3 hours one day because of childcare? Can I work 6 days a week? Can I work less hours in the week? Can I spread it over 7? And I think that's the future, Ian. Actually, I think the future for everyone will be a shorter working week, but more flexible, even across 7 days. One of our colleagues said today that asked if they could work Saturdays and Sundays because it suits their personal circumstances better. And if they can, then that's great. It's all about being flexible and caring, but trusting everyone which we do anyway. It just seems obvious that you should, that people will do what's best. So everyone wants the business to succeed, but everyone's different. People have different concerns. I think I was most worried that I saw a survey of 75,000 people where it said that 40% were anxious about returning to work. And that's something that employers should be thinking about, really. It's the individual circumstance. It's showing the care for every single person, really. Is that all right, Ian?
That's great, Donald. I think the flexible work piece is particularly important. And I know we worked with TimeWise last month on a couple of workshops around flexible work, and I think that will be so important for people, particularly in this next phase. If schools don't return to September, then childcare needs need to be built into this, care needs need to be built into this, so employers need to be far more aware. Donald, I think you're absolutely right about individual needs and being adaptable. Sharon, did you want to come in?
I was just going to confirm what Donald has said, and I have seen good practice among some of our employees, which has been incredibly inspiring and encouraging. One is around that flexible working piece and being willing to be agile in your thinking, your own working practices as leaders in your organization. So there is having a real sense of care in the return. So there are some forms of employment where people simply won't be able to work from home. The nature of the role is such that they won't be able to work from home. So then the duty of care of the employer toward those employees is to ensure that as they return to work, they feel safe. So doing everything that you need to do to create an environment where your employees are safe, that they have proper equipment, and that you're introducing proper practices that they can keep the appropriate distances and the like. And it brings to mind the issues that we faced early on. Of course, one of the pieces of research that's come out in relation to the BAME community being disproportionately affected is work practices and what would happen when they would, for example, ask for proper protective equipment, and they being first refused, as it were, when such applications were made. So just getting our employers to think about how you can ensure that employees do feel safe, as Donald has said, having conversations with them, asking what would help them to feel safe, and ensure that you're responding accordingly will really help support this transition, because there are genuine fears, for good reason, that employees have about returning to work.
Absolutely. I think the government guidance was quite good on this, but not everybody perhaps has twigged it. But the risk assessments that everyone has to perform must be done with the employees, must be consulted all the way through that, so that you're working with your workforce return to work. I know, Donald, the idea of videos so that people can understand the adaptations that have been made to workplaces is fantastic. But again, there are potential pitfalls in that, in terms of perhaps the adaptations are fine for well-bodied people, but for disabled people or people with other conditions, how have they been built into this discussion? And that's certainly something that needs to be worked through in consultation with employees. John, you wanted to come in.
I did. The point really that Donald raised, and then and Sharon's sort of referred to as well, is around this issue around flexibility over the sort of immediate period of people going back to work. I think it's inevitable that there will be changes in ways people work. More people work from home. People will stagger their times. As Donald said, some people will want to work part of the day, part of the week, different times to suit their lifestyle. I think that's fine. I think that's, you know, it's probably inevitable, and we need to embrace that. I think there is just a caveat around that, which is that one of the issues around low pay and the sort of gig economy was that one of the arguments put forward was that it was flexible for the employees, and flexibility. So I think we need to find a balance between flexibility that is positive and gives workers actually better conditions, and the kind of flexibility that led to instability, unstable employment, gig economy, 0 hours contracts. We're all quite championed. The defenders of that often used flexibility. Well, you know, people can work when they like. So I think there was if we flip the coin to the fact that we want to see that as a positive, but this needs to be done, as Ian has said, in conjunction with the trade unions, with the workforce, and you know, Donald's obviously well in touch with the people he works with, and if that's the model, then I think that it's a positive thing to slip back into flexible working when it really means unstable and unstable employment, which leads to unstable accommodation, which leads to all sorts of stresses and strains. It's probably not what we're advocating. Just a very quick point about timing, really, and I think Sharon alluded to this. I think the opportunity to be seized is now, really. I think the Build Back Better is obviously a slogan we're all signed up to, but I think there will be, certainly in the medium to longer term, a push for just build back. There will be a pressure for growth at any cost, for jobs at any cost, for any types of jobs at any cost. I think actually, if we're an alliance of people who want to see some positives come out of this, and for us genuinely to build back better, then I think the time is now, because if it's not now, then when is it? And the time is now for those changes. And I think actually our job, and the job of the Charter and all of the people who are working to put this as an agenda that's progressive, is to make sure that there is better in Build Back Better, rather than it just stops at build back. Because I think that's a potential danger, is that actually a lot of the stuff that we're saying is essential to change the fundamental inequalities and disparities in society just become seen as kind of nice to haves. You know, it would be nice if we paid the living wage. Well, it's not nice to pay the living wage. It's essential work as a wage that allows them to live a decent life, because we all pay the costs of you not doing. And I think Donald's story is fantastic, and I look forward to talking to him outside of this room about how he can get that energy and enthusiasm into our campaign.
There you go, Donald, another connection for you straight away. John, you're absolutely right. We know the economic position isn't good, and it's going to look terrible in the next 6 months. And there is a real risk that people go jobs at any cost here, in terms of how we rebuild the economy. But my view is that if we do that, we'll just undermine the opportunity we've just discovering now. But worse than that, we'll be back to square one. One of the reasons that we've raced to the wrong end of the COVID World League table in Britain is because we don't have resilience in the foundational economies and our social care, because we've not been looking after terms and conditions of the people who are trying to support the economy day in, day out. And it's not just the care workers, it's our transport, it's our security, it's our waste operatives. It's a range of services that we take for granted day in, day out that are absolutely fundamental to the operation of our society. So if we don't do that now, and we don't take that opportunity now, the next pandemic will be worse, and there will be another one. So we've got some questions from our viewers today. Got one here from Sharon. What targets, and this is, sorry, for Sharon, what targets for business would you suggest when you're looking at the laser targeting? What's the top priorities for a business to try and address?
I'm imagining, James, you're probably referring to my point on racial equality, because that's where I think I was talking about, where my focus was early on. Every single organization will have to look at itself, and it will have to do its own self-audit and determine where it is and where it ought to be. So there could never be any blanket response to that, to say that every organization needs to increase this by this and get to this by that. There isn't a blanket response to that. There is simply that every single organization should have a target. And what we don't have at the moment, as far as that is concerned, are targets. We don't have targets in relation to representation. So representing the IOD in this context, I'm encouraging our boards to be looking at their boards and saying, who's missing around this table? Why do we not have diversity? Why do we not have representation? What targets do we need to be meeting in order to ensure that, using the reports such as McKinsey and Deloitte and so on, we avoid groupthink and echo chamber around this table, and we have diverse representation. So there's no specific target, James, but it's more, let's have some targets in accordance with where we are and where we assess we should be.
A question also from Gemma. Can you suggest any effective ways to use the Rooney Rule-inspired approach to recruitment in order to actively increase more diversity in our team? Have you any experience or examples of how this has been done well? Anyone? Sharon, do you want to come in? Sharon, do you want to?
Okay, that's fine. I can respond to that. So just for those who don't know, there's a whole question around what positive discrimination should look like. Should you have specific targets where an employer will say, I want to ensure that I am interviewing a Black person, let's say, and I'm appointing a Black person, and what discrimination there is around that, what place that has, and so on in society and in the recruitment process. And the Rooney Rule was really based on this idea of having a pool of diverse talent from which you can choose. And there's an abundance of information, in particular if you look at the McKinsey reports and the employers who are listed as demonstrating good practice in those reports. They point to examples of where the Rooney Rule has been used effectively. And I do believe that there is a place for it, because there is such an imbalance to be redressed. Again, that is, Gemma, in working in partnership with your recruitment company. So the conversation that the IOD held last week in the conversations on race, we had a former recruiter who was actually a Black woman who was talking about her role and her experience in recruitment. And she was explaining that part of the challenge is that recruiters who are being employed by employers or commissioned by employers are simply going to their own pools of talent, which is very limited. Whereas if they broaden their scope and broaden their outreach, then they'll be able to bring more diverse talent that will enrich the decision-making process. So what I would say to that question, Gemma, is McKinsey has incredible examples of that you can look to and glean some information about the best approaches to to using and employing the Rooney Rule.
Thanks, Sharon. I think some of the McKinsey work, and it's been going on for years actually, has been fantastic. Really makes the economic case for diversity, and for some reason it's not been picked up and scaled. I don't really understand why, but it's absolutely fantastic work. We can post some links to that after the webinar. James liked Sharon's response to the question so much he'd wish he'd written it down. James, I can reassure you, you'll get a chance to when you see the replay. We're coming near the end. We've been running for 50 minutes or so now. So just some final comments. I just run round all of you, maybe some lasting thoughts about how employers can start today to do something to address inequalities. John, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't want to repeat what I've just said. I think there's a compelling business case for the living wage. I think it's probably got to be seen as part of a much wider suite of measures, which, of course, the Good Employment Charter already has in its sort of locker. I think it's important now that I'm not here to lecture employers. I'm in no position to, but my thoughts would be it's very important to be a good and progressive employer, and going into this period now it's even more important to be a progressive and good employer than it was coming into it, because the challenges are greater but the opportunities are there. We want people in our city region, in our own communities, to be good employers, and paying the living wage is part of that, and it's integral to it. But there are also all the many other things, diverse recruitment, treating disabled workers properly, trade union representation, health and safety, all of that. It's no less important, and you could argue, given that, as Sharon said, it's not, we've not discovered inequality in this period, but it has been it's been highlighted and kind of shone on it, really. Is that I think hopefully a lot more employers will see the positive benefits of being, better engaged and following what basically the tenets of the charter in the widest context are. So I would urge employers to engage, listen to what their employees are saying, listen to the trade unions, and listen to the public, because the public are very clear. I think it's an important point I've learned is that talking to, admittedly online in quite a lot of circumstances, a lot of people, there is a sense in which the businesses that did the right thing through this process and stepped up, and the retailers that supported food banks and all of the rest of it, will be seen in a better light than some I won't mention for probable legal reasons, who didn't appear to do the right thing and in fact seemed to do the wrong thing in some cases. So the distinction between a good employer and a poor employer has not gone away, and we would like to see more good employers than poor employers.
Thanks, John. I think John and I actually shared the reflection that Brewdog, who have turned over a lot of their production to hand sanitizer, but before all of this, they put A-boards on the street telling people that they paid their staff the real living wage. Now, that's something quite remarkable, that there's a discerning choice to be made about where you go to get a beer on the basis of how you pay your people or treat your people. And I think that market force will start to increase, definitely on the other side of COVID. Donald, how do you reflect on that?
Sorry, Ian. They also, just as a matter of interest on Brewdog, as you know, they also produced a beer called Barnard Castle Eye Test, but I'll leave that to one side. I'm
aware of that, John. Thanks. Donald, your customers, they must appreciate what you've been
doing. Well, they rate us really highly as a world-class supplier, so that's good, and they trust what we do, so that's good. I just wanted to finish, Ian, really, to say too many organisations have set up to be like versions of the Stepford Wives They're all the same. They're all white middle class with and all the blokes wear shiny shoes, you know, and they're set up that way and they recruit that way in to look like each other. And they're like these organizations are like one-dimensional. And if they broke that mold and became three-dimensional, they'd be so much better. They'd exist for a long time. They'd probably create more wealth, but hopefully share it as well. There's just a better way, and that's been going on for far too long. And diversity is a great thing, and we can all learn from each other, and we can all add value, but not if we all look and act exactly the same, really. And I think that a flexible, fair system is the way forward. And anyone who doesn't, I think they should use the hashtag FFS, because that's all, you know. That's it for me. Thanks, Donald.
Sharon, I don't know what's left to be said, actually.
I know,
but
goodness.
If you want to round some up.
I just want to say that COVID has presented for us a real challenge, but also a real opportunity. An opportunity to pioneer something different in the Greater Manchester region, and to really be a leading voice and a leading figure for what good business can look like. And so what I'm imploring employers to do is to understand that the good capitalism, conscious capitalism, is not opposed to serving your communities, that actually there's a merge into one. We can really do good business and serve our communities well, and our calls on each and every one of us to do that, so that we can serve the communities that we sit in.
Sharon, that's wonderful. Donald, thank you very much for your inspiration, and always insightful. Thank you very much. I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to our chat this afternoon. I hope you found some inspiration, but also some practical steps that you might be able to take when you get back to the day job. Thank you all for participating. Please, if you haven't, do visit the Good Employment Charter website, where you'll find not only this resource, but many others. Thank you very much indeed. Bye all.
Thank you. Thank you.